Welcome everybody to episode 45 of UnHacked. Mario, we're a little bit lean today. There's just two of us. It's kind of weird. Used to be when I did podcasts, it was always two people, and now I've gotten really comfortable having a few more voices. So you might have to help carry the episode, Mario.
My pleasure. Were we but me and you? We were by ourselves last week too.
It's a couple weeks in a row, and it's like, yeah, I'm my nerves are tingling. So, anyways,
I'm enjoying it.
Okay, good. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about third-party integrations today, and I know that that's got everybody on the edge of their seats. But first, let's go ahead and introduce the podcast, UnHacked. You know, I say it all the time, it's a deliberate misnomer because really you can't get unhacked. The good news is 97% of breaches are preventable with the basics, and that's what we talk about every week is what are these basics and how do we prevent the preventable. But if you don't do that and you get hit, getting unhacked really isn't a thing. So here we are helping business owners outsmart Russian hackers week after week. And now we've added the list, the government. We have to outsmart them because they want to come in and audit things and cause problems. And that's not bad enough. The attorneys are sniffing around trying to sue us for stuff, problems. So anyways, I am Justin Shelley, CEO of Phoenix IT Advisors, and I work with businesses in Texas, Nevada, and Utah. And like I said, keeping the hackers, the government, and the attorneys out of their bank accounts. And today, it's just you and me, Mario. Tell everybody who you are, what you do, and who you do it for.
Yeah, Mario Zaki, CEO of Mastech IT. We are located in New Jersey, right outside of Manhattan. And we work with small to medium-sized businesses, protecting their IT network and providing the business owners better sleep at night so that they know the businesses will be there the next day.
I mean, that's always a bonus when you wake up and your business hasn't just been annihilated overnight. God, it is something. Well, I mean, it really, you say that, and I mean, it really is a thing. I lose sleep over this. It's crazy. It's a crazy world, and I don't want to instill fear in people, and yet kind of I do because it's a real threat. It's a real problem. So.
Yeah, it's funny because, I tell people all the time, like, we help business owners sleep better at night. But for me, I don't sleep, but that's because I'm always thinking, and I know you're the same way. We're always thinking, hey, can we add this? Can we do this? Should I look more into this? We're constantly looking to improve security. We're always trying to be, a couple steps ahead of business owners, keeping what we call in an industry our security stack strong, and we're always adding layers. We're always trying to if they get past this, can they should we do this, should we do this, should we do this, and this is the stuff that keeps us up at night. So
well, I mean, it's a cat and mouse game, right? We can put everything in place and then tomorrow it changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fun game. And, I've said before, I did not get into the world of cybersecurity and crime prevention on purpose. I was kind of kicked into that world. I got into this because I liked computers. I liked pulling circuit boards apart, and plugging in modems and sound cards back in the day. And that one fateful Friday afternoon, I had a client get breached. And I realized I was no longer in the computer repair business, but I was in the crime prevention business and the extortion prevention business. Jesus. Okay, so Mario, today we're going to talk about integrations because I had a company reach out to me, and they were considering an integration, and they wanted me to help, talk with this third-party vendor to get it set up. And so, leading up to it, I reached out to this third party and I'm like, hey, we've got a meeting next Tuesday. Before that, I would like to have, because this was in the healthcare industry, I'm like, please send me a copy of your BAA agreement, business associate agreement, so that I can review that. And I'd also like to know what kind of data you're going to have access to, what you're going to do with it. And, I want to be prepared for our meeting when we're setting this up. And what would you imagine I heard back from the third party?
What do you say?
Crickets, nothing, no response. So I emailed him again, 2 or 3 times, and never really heard anything back. And so as soon as the meeting came, I jump on the call and I'm like, hey guys, I've been emailing you. Do we have a business associate agreement in place? Because I can't, in good conscience, give you access to patient records. Again, this is all protected by HIPAA without having that agreement. And the guy's like, yeah, no problem. Here, we're both remoted into this computer. And he's like, here's the BAA right here. Sign it. Like, I'm not going to sign it. I'm the IT guy. I'm a third party IT guy. I can't sign on behalf of this healthcare clinic. It
Oh
was
my
just,
God.
it was crazy. And so I just put the brakes on it. And cause the client wasn't even on this call. And I reached back out to them. I'm like, listen, I'm not super comfortable. I put the brakes on this and we need to get some things handled first. And I thought she was going to be mad at me. And, to my relief, she just kind of sighed and was like, thank you. She had kind of been, had a little pressure to go in and do this integration from her higher ups. She was a little bit uneasy about it. So it was validation for her that I also had some reservations. And so that's kind of what introduced this today is like, we have a lot of, they call this a supply chain attack, right? If
Mhm.
we, and Mario, in our industry, like how many different vendors do we do business with and have some sort of a tie-in to what we do?
A
You,
lot.
we can't
A
even
lot.
count them. It's a ton. And that's the direct integrations, the direct vendors that we do business with, but then they have theirs, right? This just goes, that's why
Mhm.
they call it a supply chain. This chain goes back to the, Adam and Eve, I don't know, to the beginning of time. Um, so many pieces to this puzzle that we have to be watching for. So that's my story. And as I was telling you what happened, you said that you had a little bit more personal story where you were the vendor, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Tell me.
So now this is a couple years back, right? So we, with our IT company right now, we do one of the services that we offer is voice over IP. So we
Okay.
have the ability to, obviously set up office phone systems, and we have, you know, ways to do integrations and stuff like that. So a colleague of mine, from another company asked me one time, he's like, they specialize in medical software. He asked me if we have like an integration to do like appointment reminders, through our phone system. So I'm like, no, but that is actually pretty interesting. Let's talk more. I ended up hiring some people, overseas, but it wasn't like somebody, just sitting in their basement in their underwear doing programming, but it was, an overseas company. And I had them build me a platform that would integrate with my phone system and doctor's office, the appointment reminder. I'm sorry, the office hours programs. So it took, it was a good amount of money. It took a good chunk of money, and we built this integration. It's, we tested it, we went through everything, and went live, and installed it on a bunch of different doctors' offices. And thank God we didn't have any breaches or anything. Like, but later on, I realized that it was a money pit, and we weren't scaling enough. To a point where I would start seeing like an ROI on it for a while. So I decided to, sunset the whole thing. We sunk a lot of money into it, but we didn't break even. It was a shot that I took and didn't work. But more I think about it, the more I went back, and again, this was a couple years back. Now that we are so laser focused on security, I realized, I'm like, holy shit, if this thing would have stayed live, for a long period of time, we had access, even though we were only taking, the patient's first name, their appointment time, and their phone number. We were only taking those three things because that's all we needed. So it wasn't necessarily a HIPAA violation because we're only taking the first name, we're taking their appointment time and their phone number. Okay. A lot of it is public records, or two of the three is public records.
Right.
Uh, Now, what ended up, what we nothing happened, but what if something would have happened, our integration was only pulling those that information, but we had access to the entire database for the entire medical facility,
Right.
you know. So, and just like we've talked about it in the past, unfortunately, when you do some of the stuff, you're so eager to go live and start testing and, start making some money. Then after the fact, you realize, like, you know what, maybe we should start putting in some security,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
that was that, that this was, speaking from personal experience, that is something that we ended up doing.
I
We
mean,
we we pushed back security to later on.
yeah, and we talk about that a lot. That's kind of I mean, it's just the way it works. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be, but it is the way it works. And hopefully we, in our industry, we change that. But when we're developing software or hardware, our first priority is to solve the problem, right? That's where the money's going to be made.
Hmm.
And then it's kind of this, we also ought to make sure that the Russians don't get in here. And then we don't get sued on top of it. So, and you're mentioning not only, first of all, you had access to everything. So that if somebody were able to breach your software, they could go in and pull much more than you were pulling out.
Exactly. Yeah.
But not to minimize even the amount of information you had, a first name and a phone number. And there's actually a technical definition of, what qualifies as PII, and it has to be a couple of pieces of information that tie together so that you could actually identify somebody. And I might be speaking out of turn here, but with a phone number and a first name, you probably could identify somebody, or you can get reasonably close. There's only so many
You
phone numbers
you
with the
could.
same first name tied to it. So
Yeah.
even that little bit of information is significant.
Yeah,
So,
and we weren't pulling like the last name. We weren't pulling, Social Security. We weren't pulling any
right.
medical records. We were just pulling those three pieces. But again, we built a bridge. That we literally were sitting on the server,
Yeah.
and every 5 minutes it was pulling and pushing to our database. Now, we did have like some things in place. We had like SSLs and the connections to secure and stuff like that. But a couple things that we didn't do is like 2FA, on the platform. We didn't do some verification checks and stuff like that. We I don't want to make it seem like we were completely neglecting
Sure.
security, but it wasn't. Thinking back about it now, as I realized, like, you know what, we could have. There could have been things that could have been breached. And if that would have been breached, could they have, turned a one-way bridge? Actually, sorry, we had a two-way bridge because, in like
You
version 2, we
you
would
push the
actually go
confirmation
back,
back.
we would push the confirmation and say, okay, yes, they either replied with, canceled, or did not reply at all. So there was a two-way confirmation, a two-way bridge. But thank God, we pulled it before anything happened. It could have been, it could have been serious.
Yeah.
And it brings back to what you were mentioning earlier. We didn't have any of that, you know uh, things in place. Like, we weren't compliant, for HIPAA or SOC 2 or any of that stuff. And that was one of the reasons that I decided to pull the trigger.
Right. Well, and here's the thing. So you didn't have direct control over who wrote the code, right? Because that was outsourced.
Hmm.
You don't know what libraries they're using. So when writing code, and I mean, this is dating me right now because AI writes all this stuff these days. But you would either buy or you would use publicly available DLLs. They're called,
Hmm.
which is just a chunk of code that you would use to simplify your own writing of code. The problem comes if that DLL that you get becomes in some way that gets breached, that code gets altered. You run an update or it automatically updates or whatever, and now your code is infected and you have no idea because you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. And I mean, this is a great example because it's exactly what was on my mind as I'm being asked to give some unknown third-party vendor complete access to a clinic's patient records. Like, I don't know what they're doing with it. I don't know what the integration looks like. I don't know what data they're pulling. And regardless of what they're pulling, what do they have the ability to pull? Should they get breached, or should they just be malicious? Maybe they're just bad guys all the way around. I don't know. And one of the things that really stopped me in my tracks as I was doing this, I told you they presented me with a BAA, right? Well, the problem is the name on that BAA was their third party software that they were using. So we're now, it's not even the company that I was initially working with. I'm now working with some completely unknown name, and it's not even in English. Like I can't pronounce the name of this third party that has their name on the BAA. So yeah, I just shut it down. Like, we clearly have more work to do here. And so let's go ahead and pivot there. What do we do? Because and I think when we were talking about, prepping for the session, you said something about, we don't really have any choice. If we're going to do an integration, we don't have a lot of say in what they do. Or I think you said maybe it was like the only option is to not do it. Right?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about, first of all, if you can't be secure in the integration, then it probably is the better option to not do it. Maybe you'll lose some functionality, but maybe we just go find a different vendor at that point. But let's talk about, how do we evaluate third parties? How do we evaluate them? How do we know, like, even have a hope that they're taking care? Because and by the way, I still have to do this with these two third-party vendors. I have to go out and assess them and find out, make a recommendation back to the client to see if this is a safe option. So Mario, talk about that. What do we do? Coach me through it as if I'm an idiot. How do I make sure before I give this company, the third party, complete access to my client's data?
Well, I mean, first you need to find out from them what information they actually are going to be pulling from your client, right?
Okay.
If it's, like we said, it's a doctor's office, what information do you need access to?
Right.
Okay. And when you pull this information, like, let's just say, for example, there's similar situation, they're pulling the patient's first name, phone number and appointment time. All right. Well, first of all, are you pulling it and putting it onto your server? And is this being encrypted, in transit? Like, as the data is being pulled, is it encrypted? And is it sitting on your server encrypted? And how long are you storing that information for? So, for example, in my situation, we were pulling 2 weeks worth of appointments and only holding it onto our server for 4 days. So at any given time, we only had, a little less than 3 weeks worth of patient information. Okay, and then after 4 days, we would just, delete it.
So you had I guess some automation that just went in and purged the older data from your software, from your database.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we stored it for no more than 3 weeks. But now, again, systems offline now, so I could easily say it. But at first, we were storing it on Wasabi, and Wasabi is a data storage company, with very pretty good prices. We later moved it on to AWS, but at first, just to kind of get rolling, we were putting it on Wasabi, and I don't quote me on this. I don't think Wasabi's security is really as good as like what you would say AWS is, or
Right.
and Microsoft and stuff like that. But we didn't have like 2FA or anything. We did have, um, at least the guys overseas told me that the data was encrypted, in transit and sitting on our server encrypted. But you're also relying, that's one of the questions that you would need to ask is like, who's working on this, and where are they? And are they your employees or are they subcontractors? you know, because that makes a difference. Because, you know, you could only sign paperwork and go through certain things that you're responsible for, but, you know, how do you know the other company is compliant? How do you know what they're doing with the data? How do you know what, you know, if they're SOC 2 compliant, you know?
Well, okay, so I'm glad you mentioned SOC 2 because that's where I was going to go next. Um, First of all, I want to back up a little bit. Do you remember it was back in episode 41, I think, with Jonathan Steele? He was an attorney,
Hmm.
divorce attorney. And that was a point that he made that I really liked is don't store data that you don't need. You can't lose what you don't have. So I love
Exactly.
that you at least had that safeguard in place where you were purging that
Mhm.
data after a few weeks. But now let's talk about SOC 2 and why the thing that I love most about this, because I mean, you said it yourself. Your developers who you hired, who were overseas, told you it was encrypted, but you couldn't personally confirm that, right?
Correct.
And even so, you could say, you know, whatever you want to a client. Um, SOC 2 is kind of a third party assessment or validation of, you know, how you are protecting your client's data. So it's somebody else going in, another you know, it's a framework, it's a set of um, you know, standards that you have to prove to somebody else, to a third party, that you're doing it, that you're keeping your, you know, the information safe. So I love that. If I just had, you know, the best way, if you just want to tell somebody the best way, do you know if a third party is solid, if it's a safe bet, or at least it's a reasonably safe bet, uh, get their SOC 2 certification. You know, make sure that they are actually certified SOC 2. Um, Beyond that, you know, like you said, where's the data stored? How's it stored? And can you prove it? Because
Mhm.
saying it is one thing, but can you prove it? That becomes pretty tricky.
Yeah, and we have like a client of ours that is, you know, always has to be compliant with SOC 2. You know, they work with credit restoration. So they have, you know, their SOC 2 is not just something that has to be done, you know, once a year. Okay, provide this, this, and this. It's not like kind of like tax time and here's all the information you need, and then all right, I'll see you guys next year. SOC 2 is year round, right? And one of the things that they have is I forgot how many different, hundreds of different, you know, things that you have to provide, but it's not just saying, you know, are you using MFA? You know, and it's a yes or no. It's yes, okay, upload, you know, provide, you know, evidence.
Right.
Um, you know, is data encrypted? Yes. Okay, provide evidence. You know, everything is providing evidence, and it could be, you know, a screenshot. It could be a configuration log that you're uploading or something like that. But it's not. It's not. It's never going to take somebody on their word. You know, it requires proof along the way. You know, every step of the way.
Right. And there's SOC 2 type 1 and SOC 2 type 2. It's a
Hmm.
mouthful.
I think
Um,
there's type 3 too now too.
but the key difference is just that you have to continue to prove it over time
Yeah.
and prove the effectiveness of it. So these are great. You know, nothing's absolute, but it's in the world where we are evaluating risk. That's what this all comes down to. What is a reasonable amount of precaution to take? This is probably the best bang for your buck that you've got. Go out
Mhm.
and you know and do business with people that at least have taken that extra step and become SOC 2 certified. Um,
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing too, SOC 2 is not something that you're going to get, you know, the certification for in like a week or two or a month.
it's a
It
lot of
takes
work.
a while. So when somebody is SOC 2 compliant, that means they've been around for a while. They've invested the amount of, you know, a lot of resources, a lot of manpower to get to that point. You know, these types of companies that are SOC 2 compliant has been around and is ready to really do business, and you know they've taken the measures to have your data secure. So
Right.
in a place like that, like you know it's beyond, in my opinion, it's beyond HIPAA, it's beyond NIST, you know, it's
Yeah.
beyond PCI. It's one of those bigger ones like PC, SOC 2, CMMC. Those ones are like the bigger ones.
Right. Well, a lot of the, you know, a lot of these frameworks are you can self-assess, you can self-certify. You don't have to have somebody else come in and do the assessment for you. So that is a key difference.
Yeah.
All right. So make sure that you know who you're doing business with, right? That's number one. And then number two is, well, we got to know what software we're even using to start with, right? So the second thing I would tell people is audit your inventory, your software inventory on a regular basis. We have tools that do that. Most IT companies have some sort of an inventory system. We call it an RMM, remote management and maintenance. But it will easily inventory that. Now, the challenge here is that how long is that list usually, Mario?
On one computer, it's a lot of times it's like it goes up to like 4 or 5 pages at least.
Right. For one computer, and now you got to do this across a department or an organization. Yeah. It definitely gets messy. But we're talking about, like you said, waking up the next morning and finding out that you still have a business or don't. So somewhere we've got to build this process into the way we work. So
yeah, it's and like as far as like software inventory, like a big one that we are always keeping an eye out and we set alerts in case we see this is like TeamViewer. Now, TeamViewer is a legitimate remote access program, but out of the box, it's very unsecure. So we always get, whenever we see that, we always like, hey, this needs to go.
Right.
This can't stay on your computer because it can be and has been used previously, for malicious activity.
Well, just to clarify for the audience, Shadow IT isn't necessarily sketchy programs, right? It's just software that's been installed and is being used, or not being used, but it lives in your system, and your IT company or department doesn't know about it, so they're not managing it, they're not maintaining it, and they're not making sure it's secure. So TeamViewer is a great example of that. It is a legitimate product, but either misconfigured, or even if it's configured right, somebody gains those credentials and now they're in. And once they're in, they're in. They can, that's like the drawbridge is down. You're inside the castle, and you've got all kinds of access that you just shouldn't have. So
yeah, and TeamViewer, when it's out of the box, it's the only program or one of the only programs, is that all you need is an ID, which never changes. It's linked to your computer, and a password that they generate.
Right.
Okay. You don't need to, unlike Splashtop or LogMeIn or Screen Connect, you don't need to authenticate to a website with a username, password, 2FA to get to a computer screen, to get to even see which computer has access. All you need is those two numbers, the number and the password, and you're in. You can do it from sitting in a Starbucks in Albany, with a burner phone, like you just download the app, you're in. You don't need any authentication, as a username or password or anything like that elsewhere.
Right. Oh, good times, right? Good times. All right, Mario, listen, that's we're gonna we're gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. It was just one of those things that caught my attention. I'm glad it happened just because it brought something that I know, but to the front of mind, to put a spotlight on it, and something I felt we needed to talk about. It's so convenient to do all these integrations, and it's happening more and more and more. IT used to be security anyways, used to be pretty simple. But now, I still remember, I don't hear it as much anymore, but people would say, oh, we're fine, we moved to the cloud. Like, oh, shit. Now we've got problems, because everybody's in the cloud and everything's got to integrate and talk to each other. And anywhere along this supply chain, something can happen that just screws everybody else up. So important topic. And, let's just move to key takeaways. Mario, if somebody just came to this part, what's the one thing you would want them to know and understand?
when you're working with a third-party system, you need to find out, how long they've been around? How long, are they new to the block? Is what's attracting you? Is it just their price? Because that price is probably because they're trying to just get started with their company. You know, the ones that are SOC 2 compliant are probably a little more expensive. So, find out how long this company's been around, and find out what certifications do they have to prove to you that they're legit.
Right. Perfect. And, for me, I'm going to say that I talk a fair amount about compliance. That's something that we're just really focusing on in our business. And part of the compliance package is vendor risk assessments, and they are thorough. It's not something that you're going to do in a few minutes, but there is an actual framework for going and assessing vendors. And I would highly recommend, when you do these integrations, to hire somebody and run through that. Spend a few bucks up front to save yourself the nightmare or the waking up into a nightmare where it's game over, right? And SOC 2. I mean, we've already talked about it, but
Yeah.
find a way to actually validate that what they tell you is true.
Yeah,
So,
unfortunately, some people technically all they ask is how much and how long do I have to sign up for? That's all
yep.
they're asking,
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's exactly right. And what does it deliver? What problem is it solving? As long as it's going to solve a problem, the price, that's where the evaluation stops. And actually, that's really where this process should begin before you sign up. Go and do that vendor assessment. If you'd like that done for you, go to unhacked.live, right? You can get either Mario or my information there, or hire your own firm, but just make sure that this is a process that you follow on a regular basis. And guys, go to the website and you can find our social media links. We always give out a free assessment. We've been talking about that for ages. Haven't mentioned it recently, so I wanted to bring that back up. But there's actually a tab on unhacked.live for the free assessment. You can go and pick one of us, sign up, and we'll help you out. Take care of you. Mario, that's a wrap. We're going to go ahead and close out for this week. But as always, thank you for being here. Say
Thank
goodbye,
you.
and we'll see you guys all next week.
Take care, guys.